So good afternoon and welcome to this hearing session on the proposed conditions and the legal agreement matters relating to the residential and commercial development at Candleriggs, Ingram Street and Albion Street, Glasgow. My name is Elspeth Cook. Most of you have seen me before online or at the site visit, and I'm the reporter appointed to consider this case on behalf of the Scottish Ministers and prepare a report and recommendation to them on whether to grant planning permission. This event is being broadcast on the web and is also being recorded and will be available to review afterwards. I'll ask everyone now to introduce themselves. I know you have done informally as Callum will start in the meeting, but just briefly for the record as to who's attending, and probably start with Mr. Sutherland, assuming you're speaking on behalf of the applicant today.
Alison Sutherland, Ernest Paul for the applicants, and here in the room with me is David Westwater from Artisan Developments and Richard Mackenzie from RMP Consultants. And Tanya Porter has now popped up on screen as well, so she's also attending for the applicant.
Okay, that's great. And who do we have from the council in the end? Assuming Mr. Scott, you're leading on this.
Alan Scott, Planning Officer for Glasgow City Council, and we're also joined by the team manager. I'll let Susan introduce herself.
Susan Connolly, team manager for City Centre Development Management.
And who do we have from the Community Council in the end? Maybe Lindsay McIntyre. I think you're meant to be representing the Community Council, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Hi, I'm Lindsay McIntyre. I'm a Director of PSG Acoustics and I'm here representing Merchant City and Trongate Community Council.
Thank you. And I'm assuming Tam Coyle hasn't arrived yet, is that correct? I don't see his name.
You should be trying to join. Hello? You should be trying to join.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll crack on. And then the other parties, if you could just quickly, I think we've got all your names. I'm just wondering whether or not we need to say who everybody is. I think all of you should see the names in the attendees list at the side, and I think everybody's photograph is labelled accordingly when they speak. Is that okay if we just crack on and take the introductions as being from the list at the side of the screen?
Can I just say, reporter, that I had some difficulty. This is Peter Heyman from Motor City Park Limited. I had some difficulty joining, and I think Callum has put me on the side, but without a name. And I presume I'll put my hand up and see if it works. Does that work? I need to talk to you. Thank you.
That's fine.
You are checking if it's working. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, you are coming up as Peter Heyman. So if you do identify yourself, I'm seeing you as Peter Heyman guest.
Good. Thank you very much.
That's fine. That's great. Thanks for letting me know. That's helpful. So it's a requirement of my report to ministers that I prepare a set of conditions in the event that the ministers decide to grant planning permission for the proposals before them. So this hearing allows me to ask some questions regarding the purpose and the wording of those conditions. I need to be sure that they're suitable and otherwise meet the established tests. Similarly, that the matters contained in the legal agreement would comply with the relevant guidance on such matters. A hearing takes the form of a structured discussion where I ask questions of the persons I think are best able to explain a particular point. My questions will be addressed to the main contact for each party. It's for them to decide who's best to respond. There's no cross-examination in this type of event. You're not really permitted to ask questions direct to the other participants. But I will, as far as possible, allow you an opportunity to comment or ask questions through me. And you can do that obviously by raising your hand and drawing attention to your interest in participating. Obviously, I'm going to go through agenda point by point. When I think I've got enough information on a particular topic, I'll move on to the next one and we'll carry on from there. Now, Just because there's so many of you on screen today, I might not be able to see everybody, so it will be important, I think, that we try and use that hand-waving tool that Peter Heyman was just demonstrating very effectively there. If you want to attract my attention, I think that's going to be the easiest way. If you see me looking to the side, it's because the easiest way to see everybody is to put the screen to my left with all the pictures and keep my camera in front of me. However, I want you to kind of bear in mind we're obviously recording through this online meeting system, so it's only the person that's holding the mic that gets recorded, so there's not really an opportunity to speak over anybody. So I need you to be courteous and wait till people have made their point before responding. I also need you to kind of be aware I might pause between items just to take my notes. It's not really an invitation for you to fill the silence with additional discussion. You'll see from the agenda that I circulated previously that I've identified a number of issues that I'd want to resolve today. It's not my intention that the time within the hearing session should be spent actually writing new or amending the conditions in front of us. What I hope to achieve is an understanding of any changes that might be required so that these can, if necessary, be taken into account and an updated list of conditions prepared. The applicant offered wording for a revised condition 42 in its submission on the 23rd of August, so I'll be looking at that along with the change to condition 24 that was submitted by the council earlier, and I'll be reading these alongside the council's committee report that gave me the original set of conditions for consideration. The council has also been revising the draft conditions since the agenda was issued, but I was only made aware of those. Getting a bit of feedback from the person that's just joined, I think. Anyway, I was only made aware of those draft conditions late yesterday afternoon. I made the decision not to circulate council submission. I would rather proceed with the agenda as I'd planned, looking at the original conditions set out in the council's committee report. In light of the discussions today, I'll then ask the council to update their draft conditions and ensure parties have a chance to comment on the eventual changes. I just didn't feel we had enough time for all the parties to have a chance to read the new document and take on board anything that it contained. It was just not enough lead-in time for that. So apologies. Does anyone have any questions about the format of the meeting before I proceed on to the first topic? Any hand raising? Right, okay. So it seems we'll crack on, and saw there that Tam Collins arrived and filled that gap in our attendee list, so that's great. So the first topic on the agenda that I've set is to look at the amended description again. The applicant and the council were quite happy with that amendment that I suggested way back in June, which was to take on board a slight change to the use class numbering in the use classes statutory order. That's been done. And as a result of that, the council updated condition 24. And you'll see from my points that the condition does two things. Obviously, it sets the use classes for the first set of occupiers. But the amendment, but the second part of it actually requires subsequent changes to be the subject of an application for planning permission. So you can see the 2 points I've raised that I want to have a look at. So the first one is, I'm really hoping the council and the applicant can answer very quickly, is that would the condition be more precise if the statutory order relating to the use classes order was set out in the condition, just to clarify the source of those three classes referred to. So really to ask the council first on that.
Yeah, I think I don't really see an issue with adding the statutory order into that condition if you feel that that's necessary, just to clarify where it's coming from. So quite content for you to reword it if that's if you feel that's appropriate.
And does the applicant have a view on that? The second point is perhaps the more unusual one, and that's really this issue of removing the potential permitted development rights that those three use classes might have. So I really was wanting to get from the council some idea of why this longer term control is needed, i.e. stopping the first uses changing as they are entitled to do within the permitted development rights that cover changes of use, which are class 10, 11, 11A and 11B, I think cover sort of movement in between class 1A, class 3 and class 4 of the use classes order. Sorry, this is all full of planning jargon for everybody else. It'll make sense to Alan, and I'm sure Terry will deal with it all the time. So my first question really for the council is just why you were thinking you needed that extra control here at this particular location.
I think it's really because there's the different classes within the application description. We certainly weren't looking to remove the permitted development rights from the units. It was really to cover, because there are the different use classes included within the application description. So it's to retain control over those future uses and the changes.
Yeah, but I'm not quite sure. So if you had a legitimate class 1A retail and a food use taking units 1 and 2, what would be the issue in those moving freely into the other classes that are possible within the changes of use? Well, I see Susan Connolly, do you want to come in on this?
Yes, thanks very much. We frequently use this condition. The purpose of the condition is not to limit permitted changes of use. If you look at the reasoning for the condition, it's actually so that we understand what the original use class is. So it's so that we understand each individual unit has a use class assigned to it. So from there, we can keep an up-to-date record of that established use class at commencement, if you like, of the development.
I would agree with you. That's not actually what the condition says.
Yeah, I read the bottom part of the condition, and actually we probably wouldn't mind that being removed. It's really just to establish the original record keeping of those use classes of those units at the time of commencement of development.
Yep.
I think it's maybe just needs a bit of clarity in terms of subsequent changes of use that would normally require permission. So, for example, if the class 1A unit wanted to change to a restaurant, then it would require planning permission because it's sitting below a residential property.
Yeah.
Okay, so that maybe just needs a bit of clarification.
So perhaps what you're looking to do is just so that it doesn't change other than within the powers available through the permitted development rights for changes of use. It's really what you're looking to achieve, not any additional control.
I think, I've referred back to Alan. I think looking at the new use classes order, what we wouldn't want to see is another use going in there, which might be permitted development, which may not be suitable for below a residential development.
Okay. That's then saying that, yeah, what I'm trying to get to work out is why that would be if class 1A, class 3 and class 4 uses, according to the permitted development rights, do have a certain element of change that can happen without needing planning permission, whether or not why you would want to have further controls beyond what the reason would be.
Yeah, we don't mind that being clarified.
Well, that's really what I'm trying to clarify just now. Ms. Connell, I'm trying to work out what the reason being is that why you want to make everything need planning permission, as opposed to only control the things that would normally need planning permission, should those uses all be occupied and in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be happy for that to be incorporated in that condition for clarity.
Does the applicant have a view then on that particular issue of future control?
Is it subject to anything the supporter might have to say in addition to what I've got to say? I agree that there is I suppose a presumption in the use class order that's well, not presumption, but there's this legal right to change from between use classes in particular circumstances, and unless there is a good reason for that to be departed from, then I don't see why the requirement isn't the only condition. I should say from the applicant's point of view, it doesn't have any particular difficulty with the wording being in there and there being that restriction that would require them to apply for planning permission. But I do completely take your point that if actually it's not necessary from council's point of view, then it would seem sensible to take it out.
Right. Okay. So I think I can understood what you're trying to do, but I think unless I had a more specific reason regarding the sensitivity of the location, I'm not seeing that yet in terms of that development in that area as to why those particular commercial uses wouldn't be able to function and operate within the normal controls that are required of them. So maybe that's something I think I'd like to have a look at with the council wants to have another look at how they could word the second part of that condition so that reasonable control is there. And I totally accept that you want to establish that first use so that you know which units are in the retail and the food uses, because that's important for other purposes. So I think I'd be happier with seeing that being a bit clearer as to what the future controls were. Now, before I go on, does anybody have a view on that particular topic from the other parties here? So it's fairly specific. Not seeing anybody putting their hand up. Oh, sorry, Dr. Mills, I'm seeing you now, but I'm looking for the hand tool. Remember, so I can, this one here, the little yellow hand. If I do that, see, I've put a hand up.
I've got
That's what I'm looking for you to do, because that'll help me spot you on the screen. Okay.
I've got it up now.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Dr. Mills. You had a point to make.
Two things, actually, if possible. Just a clarification that of my understanding that the amalgamation of class 1 and class 2 is to make it easier to move between uses without planning permission. Just seeing that this would equally apply to a betting office. Am I correct in that assumption?
Well, I wasn't really here to give you planning advice. I would need to have a read of it in detail, but basically, once you are in a certain group of uses, that you are in that group and you are free to move within the group, within the use classes order. But then once you move to the permitted development order, that gives you other permitted rights to move between uses that are different uses. So you can move within class 1A, and then under certain conditions, you can move between class 1A, class 3 and class 4. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but it does exist. Did you have a second point, Dr. Mills, before we move on?
Yes, I don't know if it's appropriate here or at the end or not, but just why and when was class 11 removed from the proposal?
Okay. Well, we can maybe ask that now. I obviously got an amended description that didn't have the class 11. Perhaps the applicant or Mr. Scott could confirm. I see that the applicant just wanted to come back on that point anyway. So maybe go to the applicant first.
Thank you, Mel. It's not time for that. It's just betting office use class is sui generis, so there wouldn't be any right under the use class order, under permitted development rights, to change from either 1, 3, or 4 to a betting office.
Right, thank you. Mr. Scott, can you recall when class 11, I think that's assembly and leisure, was removed from the description?
Just checking back just now, I think it was around about the time of the committee back. There's discussions with the applicant back around about the actual planning applications committee time, to remove the class 11 reference from the description. So yeah, it was around about the committee, it was prior to the planning applications committee being held. Feedback is on that.
No. I don't know whose microphone that is. To that horrible feedback.
So
I think it was Mr. Hughes. Okay. Was the applicant wanting to come back in on that point? Still got your hand up, Mr. Sutherland? No. Okay. No, it's fine. It's just left over. Right. So, has anybody got any other points to make on that point about the use class order? Dr. Mills?
And sorry, I'm just wondering why it was removed, because that was a proposal that we all submitted representations on.
Okay. I have been presented with the case with the use class removed, so it's not too crucial from my point of view because I have a proposal without class 11. Mr. Scott, are you able to give any indication as to why that change was made?
It was through discussions with the applicant at the time. We considered it appropriate to remove class 11 description, so it was taken out prior to committee meeting.
Well, I'm happy I've got a little bit more clarity on that purpose of that condition. So I'm tending to go on to item 3 on the agenda now. This one might take a little bit more discussion because obviously this is relating to the control of noise, and it relates back to the noise impact assessment. I've noted here I'm likely to perhaps make reference to the noise impact assessment, the applicant's further written submissions and the further response, and the council's further written submissions, so you may or may not have them in front of you. You'll see from the agenda I raised 4 basic points as a sort of summary of the topic, and that is about the clarity of the terminology, the range of mitigation measures that might need to be specified in the condition, the scope, timing and purpose of any post-completion testing, and also a kind of overlap with anything in condition 30 where a different, or what looks like a different noise level has been quoted, and for different purposes. Obviously it's coming from a different need to control the noise. So looking at those 4 points, I kind of need to kind of look more at a discussion perhaps involving various people here around the table about the first matter of terminology. So I'll kind of say to you what I'm looking to try and resolve here. So I understand that the condition seeks to secure the final noise mitigation design features. If I use that phrase, I don't know if that's the right phrase, but I need to be sure that I have got the correct terminology in that condition so that the applicant knows what's required to be submitted, in what format, and to meet what standard. And there's just a little bit too much flexibility in the language just now, and I'd like to really get that buttoned down. So, for example, in the noise impact assessment in chapter 8, it's entitled recommendations. And the word recommendations from the noise impact assessment is used a few times. But when you look underneath that, it's actually a list of building specifications, is the phrase that's used. When the applicant prepared their alternative condition, they used the word recommendation and also project criteria. Now, that might be the same thing, but I couldn't find a definition for project criteria. And then in the further written submissions, the applicants talk about acoustic performance. And I used the phrase acoustic performance in the topic in the sort of point in my agenda, because I thought actually that was quite useful, because that was actually about the acoustic performance standards of the final design as opposed to the actual mitigation. And I was looking to try and find a way of getting the right terminology so that you could differentiate between a design standard and a standard to aim for and an actual mitigation measure, which is the thing, the actual device, the bit of technology, the building material that you're going to use to achieve it. So I'm really looking to see if we can, with all the people in the room, agree the difference and the right terminology and where that should be sourced. But also, I want you to have a think about, before you come back on your answer, is whether or not there needs to be an underlying connection back to the assumption made in the noise impact assessment regarding the appropriate noise curve. Now, I don't want to get into a discussion about whether which noise curve should apply. It's essential that here we presume that the ministers would be determining the application as it's proposed, which is with a noise acoustic performance mitigation measures that address the noise curve that the applicant's noise impact assessment has decided was appropriate. That's the premise behind preparing these conditions. So the really, perhaps just to go back, if you can remember these various points, and we'll have a discussion around terminology and see if we can work out what are the key phrases that need to be in this condition to make sure we understand the standard and the mitigation. So possibly I would go maybe to the applicant first and maybe get them to explain perhaps the differences here and make sure perhaps we can get language from them that is tying back to the noise impact assessment.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll ask Richard Mackenzie to assist you with the noise impact assessment and the language that's been used in that, and then what that means and how it's then reflected in the condition. But I think it might be helpful just as an introduction, just to explain how the applicant sees condition 42 working in practice from the applicant's perspective, which is the noise impact assessment has been carried out. What the applicant and the condition proposes is that after the detailed design of the building has been finalised, because that's not yet happened. So the measures in the noise impact assessment are in principle measures, if you like. So they might not be the final detail of the particular piece of glazing or bit of steel or whatever. So once the building has been got a detailed design, having regard to the noise mitigation requirements, then there'll be a further detailed scheme of mitigation measures which will be produced by the applicant. And then the final stage will be answering that. In terms of timing, those detailed mitigation measures would be recommencement. Then in terms of the final stage, once the development's actually been completed, there would then be testing to make sure that the noise environments within the development, within the residential properties, then complies with the relevant standard. And that's where I was actually, I know that the applicant in its revised proposed revised condition 42, it's specifically made reference to NR25 for the for music noise. I'm just bringing up the report of handling to see if. Yes, that was the addition. So in the original condition, there wasn't any specific noise rating that had been mentioned, but then in the applicant's proposed revised condition, there is specific reference to condition 30 for traffic noise, and then for road traffic noise, and then condition 40, NR25. NR25, I think Lindsay just fell off either. NR25 for music. So that's.
Yeah. Well, what to do is concentrate on the first part of that explanation, because I'm going to ask you some questions about the post-completion monitoring and testing. So if we stick with the getting the terminology right on the first part, which is properly specifying in the condition what you're aiming to achieve and what the scheme should contain, or what the further submission should be and how we should describe it so everybody knows what they're to put in.
So whenever we talk about criteria within the report, we're referring generally to the NR25 criteria, which we have set as the council have set as the appropriate level to be achieved within the residential properties. Section 8, which we've called the summary recommendation, is in fact what is referred to as the mitigation measures. As Alistair's just explained, this is outline mitigation measures which will essentially be added to or replaced by the additional assessment document that will be produced at the end of stage D design, which will include all of these specifications, a lot more detail on the junctions and the materials that are going to be used. On top of that, there is the building performance targets. So that is the sound insulation that the building should achieve. And that is what the mitigation measures have to deliver to allow the NR25 to be achieved for the given source noise.
Yeah. Okay, so you've given me some extra words there. I'm still trying to perhaps find a term of phrase for the high level in principle mitigation measures, which is different from the scheme of mitigation measures, so that we can differentiate between the two, because that was what was a little bit misleading about the condition, is that it used the phrase mitigation measures twice, and therefore it was a little bit confusing. Although I understood what it was trying to do, but I was just trying to find a way of where the overarching standard and then the detailed design of the mitigation measures are clearly two different things. But I'm taking on board, obviously, from your amended condition that you've suggested, that using NR25 would be a good starting point, and it maybe needs to be something embedded into the beginning of a condition. That the improved noise mitigation should meet the standards set out in section 8, if that's the right word, or performance standards, acoustic performance standards. I'm really looking for your guidance here as to what you think would be the right terminology. So I suppose I'm still asking the applicant what the difference would be to get something, and then to obviously see if the council are happy with those differences.
There's two things I can completely take on board. I fully understand the comments now that in that first sentence where it's talking about in compliance with the recommendations with RMP noise impact assessment, I think that should at the very least say with the recommended mitigation measures within the RMP noise impact assessment, because that's what I think from what Mr. Mackenzie said, that's the purpose of section 8. It really is setting out a high level, and whether it's that we can maybe come up with some wording with the council, but then I'm looking through the. Well, I think taking the. I can understand that the desire to have something up front at the beginning of the condition, but I think reading it as a whole, if at the end there, the building's only going to be occupied, the developer is only going to be allowed to put occupants in if NR25 is achieved, and if the council is satisfied after having seen the testing, then I think reading the condition as a whole, it'd be clear that NR25 is the noise standard that has to be achieved by the mitigation measures.
Yes, I suppose that presumes that we're working from your amended version, and obviously we've still got the council's one in play at the moment, and the council was looking at how they could refine it themselves. I know that as they were looking to see how they could tidy that up. The one of the phrases that was giving me a little bit concern was this issue of using straight off the approved noise mitigation measures, because is that in theory there's nothing called the approved noise mitigation measures at that point. At the point of where you start reading that condition, nothing's been approved. What you have is a set of accepted recommendations in the noise impact assessment, but you don't have approved noise mitigation measures. And that's what I was trying to get away from using that phrase, because I don't know what the approved noise mitigation measures are, because you haven't submitted them yet. What you've got are a set of recommended mitigation measures, or in principle, or acoustic performance standards, or building specifications. That's what you have. You don't technically have a set of approved noise mitigation measures. So I think that's what I was trying to. That's the thing I'd like to get a better term for. So maybe that's something we could look at. So maybe let the council come in on that point now, because obviously it's Mr. Scott's condition that he's been working on. Is there anything you could help with there in terms of that clarity?
Yeah, I think I understand where you're coming. What you're saying about the approved noise mitigation, that word approved. Last I think was as in the noise impact assessment's been reviewed by Council's Environmental Health and subsequently approved by the Planning Applications Committee. But yeah, I could understand you maybe wanting to have a rethink about actually using the approved the terminology in that condition. Yeah, whether it's or the recommended noise mitigation measures rather than approved.
Yeah. It could actually be, the development shall be completed in compliance with the recommended noise mitigation measures in Section 8 of the noise impact assessment.
Yes,
that's maybe what we're trying to get there.
Yeah.
Because and obviously it says before the use of the development commences, but that's that you would want it to be built in accordance with that. And then the final scheme, if that's the words you use, the final scheme is submitted for the approval of the council with all the extra detail that Mr. Mackenzie's talking about, confirming up which products are going to be used and such like. That comes in and that is approved before work starts as well. And that might be what I'm trying to see. If that's where I'm trying to go with that particular condition. I see the applicant and Ms. Connolly is looking to come back in. Perhaps Ms. Connolly, would you want to come back in first to the council again with your point, and then we'll go back to the applicant? Sorry, yeah. Are you wanting to make a point?
Yes, I did, but I think you've probably answered that point because I think I was going to suggest that we just take out the word approved before noise mitigation measures, but I think the use of the word development shall be completed is probably more appropriate. And, you know, kind of removes any uncertainty.
And then we look at properly referencing where the recommendations come from, because obviously if the Scottish ministers make a favourable decision using the noise impact assessment as the basis, then it's those overarching recommendations that are informing the performance or the final performance of the building in terms of its noise insulation. Okay, that's fine. So maybe come back to the applicant. Would you want to come back in with something there, Mr. Sutherland?
As highlighted by the word approved, and also then that's before you gave your suggestion and explanation about the development shall be complete in accordance with. So we I think we've all arrived at the same position.
There's lots of options here. We just need to agree what are the right words.
I think there are some confusion. I think that the approval comes midway through the discharge of that condition when the detailed scheme is approved. So I think we just at least have to delete approved from the beginning.
Yes. Okay. I'm wondering if there's anybody else wants to come in on that point. I'm assuming Ms. McIntyre. So yes, I thought you might want to contribute something there.
Yeah, it's been good to hear what everyone has to say about this. I think my initial thoughts on the condition as it was written by the council was that there's obviously this reference, as there probably has to be, to what's in the RMP report, which is the noise impact assessment that supported the application. I picked up on the same point that you've just described, in the sense that the mitigation measures, as they're described in the noise impact assessment, have almost recently been sort of recast as in principle. And then there would be this secondary piece of work, which I think is absolutely essential to really nail down what those mitigation measures are, and also to what standard they require to be designed. Now, I know you said earlier on that you didn't want to talk about the noise rating curves, and that's fine. However, all these things are so interlocked in terms of ensuring that the agent of change principle is adequately addressed. And my assumption is that this condition is intended to implement the agent of change principle, which is obviously quite a high bar to ensure that the venues are appropriately protected, or in the future, if this ends up being residential use, right on their doorstep. So I think it needs to be of a very high design standard, but also the detail needs to be locked in. And I think the only way that that can come is through the scheme of mitigation measures being submitted. I also note that it says it should be agreed between all relevant parties. And again, the devil's in the detail there. My recommendation would obviously be that all key stakeholders are included in all relevant parties, but I'd be interested to know who might get the opportunity and what the mechanism might be for that, to allow all relevant parties to comment as to whether the scheme is adequate to achieve the high standards of the agent of change.
Okay. Well, one of the things I was going to come back on, because obviously there's different versions of the condition, and I did ask in the further written submissions about who the relevant parties would be. My instinct is relevant parties used in a condition is not suitably precise, that it's a bit too open-ended, and I think the council recognised that themselves, and certainly the applicant has. It's not normal course, I would have thought, for something that has to be submitted to a planning authority to be approved by a third party, whoever that is, and regardless of their role as a stakeholder in the outcome. There is a turn of phrase I've seen used in other circumstances where it is planning authority in consultation with other parties. I've seen it used, say, for something like in consultation with SEPA, when you're trying to agree an environmental condition. So it could be that condition looks at the planning authority taking proper responsibility for approving the final detail, and then who they consult with to ensure that they have properly checked that they've got the right information that would in a sense be something they could either specify or choose to do themselves before they gave any approval to the matters in the condition. It would be up to the planning authority to satisfy themselves they had the right information. Certainly, as a matter of course, I'd expect them to be engaging with their own environmental health colleagues over the information that they receive, especially when it might be of quite a technical nature. How does the applicant feel about that? Because obviously I was looking for that to come through, this idea that the people involved in approving it are really the planning authority, and who they choose to help them with that is normal business, really. Does the applicant have a view on that?
We set our submissions in reference to environmental health officers, but certainly discharge of the planning conditions is a matter for the planning officers. And as you rightly said, the evidence they have in relation to that is a matter for them. And certainly the applicant wouldn't be looking for the condition to include any requirement for the planning authority and for direct the planning authority in any way as to how it should go about gathering that information.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that seems a more prudent response. Does anybody have a point on that particular issue about the standards and the terminology before I move on to my next question? I think we covered all of that. So the next question I've got, which is it's a specific thing, and it's to do with that list of recommendations. Because I think when the council's version of the condition uses the phrase, the mitigation measures should include, I never like should, I'll tell you that now, just that's an aside, always like shall, include glazing specifications, structural build-ups, floors, walls, floors, ceilings, where required, details of linings to mitigate against structural-borne noise transmission. Now, my two questions from that list is it's actually quite prescriptive. It's not open-ended, so it doesn't pick up anything else that the applicant might want to tell us. But it also omits to mention the mechanical ventilation systems, which are an integral part of the recommendations in Section 8 of the Noise Impact Assessment. And there's no mention of the transfer of vibration, again, which is part of the recommendations. So I was wondering if that particular list of things that should be in the final scheme could be a little bit more, either fully embrace everything or worded in a way which picks up everything that might be relevant, so that there's no question that all of the things need to come forward in the scheme. I don't think anybody's going to really disagree with me on that. I'm not expecting to, but I'm just looking for a confirmation that the applicant and the council could see the merit in that being a little bit more precise or inclusive to make sure everything's picked up. Does the applicant or the council have a view?
Yeah, I think we would agree with that, wouldn't we, Alan?
Yep, okay. It's fine. So the council's okay. Mr. Sutherland, is that?
Agreed.
Yep, okay. And I saw Dr. Mills, you've raised your hand there.
Sorry, I didn't get up fast enough to the end of your first points that you were discussing. It seems that much has been put on the environmental health approval, and unless there's another document other than the one in August 2022, it wasn't really very convincing approval. The wording used was seems reasonable. So, you know, there's a lot of emphasis being put on the approval of the environmental health. And I'm just pointing out that the wording seems reasonable, which didn't seem to be an incredibly supportive response.
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Scott wants to come back on that. I don't know if there were some email exchanges, I think, that gave a bit more clarity to that you shared with us.
Yeah, I did share the email exchange with our environmental health colleagues, and we were content with their review of the noise impact assessment. So, and we went with their recommended condition at the time. Not sure if I've got anything further to add to that.
Yeah, I'm not unduly worried about that, because in terms of what the task I have just now, Dr. Mills, primarily because, again, what I said saying earlier is I move forward from the point of view that Scottish ministers will approve the submission based on the paperwork that we have and the noise impact assessment they have. Therefore, this exercise is always done on the basis that what we have is the agreed and approved information that's going to inform the decision. The council's position is that they were content with the noise impact assessment. There's no indication that they ever had any issues with the noise impact assessment, and that's how it would be presented to the ministers. That the length of email or response that the environmental health officer gave is not fully relevant in that respect. It's just a position that the council's presented in the course of this process. The applicant, you've wanted to come back on that?
Thank you, Mel. Just briefly, just to clarify that when I was mentioning the approval of the environmental health officers, that would obviously be at the next stage going forward, when we were talking about in consultation with the parties, and we were saying that it's that environmental health should have further input. Again, it's a massive match for the planning officers, whether what evidence they need, but we're not trying to rely on what environmental health may have said in the past to then say that there should then definitely be approval of detailed mitigation measures that will be brought forward in the future. Just to clarify, we're not, I think maybe for Dr. Mill's benefit, we're not trying to rely on that and carry it forward into the future. It would be environmental health that they're looking at it again. They'll look at it with the detailed mitigation measures with fresh eyes and participate in that process as appropriate at the time.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. That's quite helpful. The third point I want to come back to here is the one I kind of stopped you with earlier, and it's about how to describe and put in place the post-completion monitoring and testing. So I've looked at the kind of how that might be done. Obviously, there's now two different versions, a third that hasn't been shared yet, that the council's been working on. I've looked at the revised version that you gave me, and it's partly down through your paragraph at the bottom of the page. It says, correct execution of the detailing on site should be checked by a member of the Institute of Acoustics, competent with, and it's required prior to occupation, and it sets out the standards of what they're going to try and achieve thereafter. I've just wondered if you'd noticed that you weren't going to submit that to anybody, and that the council wasn't going to see the result of that. I think you intended that to be shared with them, but it doesn't actually say that in your version of the condition. I think the council was trying to get that information submitted too, but I don't think that was all that clear. Post-completion testing and monitoring would be required once development is completed. Again, required, but not required to be submitted for anybody to have a look at. So I was conscious that I think some reassurance back to the council once the testing and monitoring has been carried out would be prerequisite in that condition. Going back to obviously the point that Lindsay McIntyre made, we're looking to make sure our agent of change ideas are embodied in this condition. And obviously, what happens then if at that point there is something that hasn't met the required standard, that isn't showing compliance with what was originally expected by the noise impact assessment? There needs to be some measure and means in which to revisit that. Presumably, I would expect perhaps the applicant doesn't present the information where it's failed and actually addresses it before it comes back to the council. But, you know, we need to make sure that if there's any question that the building hasn't met the standard that is the one that everybody believes is the correct one, then there needs to be some means by which that is resolved. So those are the points I want to probably put to the applicant and the council. Well, the applicant first, what is your response to that?
Thank you, Madam. And we have taken those comments on board, and we have, rather, the applicant's team has seen the council's proposed revised condition, which does go further than the applicant's proposed revised condition, and the applicant is happy to accept the additional requirements that the council have proposed, and that does cover off many of the points that you have raised there in terms of for the detailed scheme mitigation measures, that being submitted to and approved in writing by the planning authority, and then an obligation thereafter for those mitigation measures to be implemented in the approved manner. So that deals with that middle phase. And then on the final, on the testing being carried out and that being submitted to and approved in writing and the planning authority prior to occupation of the residential development, happy to accept that. And then also happy to accept the council have proposed an additional, not quite sure how to describe it, a catch-all or a backstop or an extra safety measure to ensure that where actually there is evidence of non-compliance, that where they don't satisfy the required standards, that the residential development not be occupied until there's been an updated scheme of mitigation measures and it's gone back through that process of being tested again to the satisfaction of the planning authority. So that's the applicant has agrees that that's to make the condition as robust as possible and adding those in. Fine.
Yep. Okay. That's good. Lindsay McIntyre, you wanting to come in on this point?
Yes, if you don't mind. It's really just, again, perhaps just to highlight the moving parts here. In terms of the testing, I think it's quite important to have a clear description of the methodology that's going to be applied that's also agreed in advance. I know obviously there was mention there of, for example, a representative from the IOA being involved, and that's great. The only reason I raise that is because we've already had some debate over the last few weeks about source conditions and what's typical and what's worst case, and whether the test conditions were beyond worst case or whether. So when it comes to that testing, it's got to be really clear what the source levels. So if we have amplified sound in the old fruit market, for example, what those levels are and what the frequency content is. And the reason why this is so important, just to reiterate, is because the most likely point of failure is in the low frequencies, and that has to be suitably represented in the testing to ensure that whatever that noise rating curve is that eventually becomes the standard, and you know what my view on that is, then that low frequency content that's generated in the venue is allowed to ingress and be measured at a relevant level. So there's just another little moving part there that I think maybe needs to be worked in, and it probably just needs to be a clear statement of methodology to make sure that when it gets on the ground that all of these conditions are fulfilled, to make sure that the tests are valid.
Yeah. Susan Connolly, I think you want to come in.
Yes, it was just to say that we had further revised the condition in discussions with the applicant to tighten up both the wording and effectiveness of the condition. So it now has several parts. I'm adding information to our condition as we as we go on, taking into account what Lindsay's mentioned about potential parameters, we had included testing during a representative music concert in the adjacent venue. However, it may be that we slightly change that wording to during an agreed representative music concert, which would perhaps address Miss McIntyre's comments about the low frequency impact.
I was thinking, and it's sort of in, I can't remember exactly which version of the condition I've seen it in. The idea that, and it's the point Ms McIntyre's just made there, that perhaps in amongst those early matters that are agreed or approved by the council and from the applicant is the post-completion monitoring regime. And that rather than the condition itself set out something very complicated, including all these the technical specifications along the lines of what Ms McIntyre has raised, that perhaps that specification of the post-completion monitoring is something that is agreed, and then the applicant knows what they're aiming to do at the point that the building is complete and the technical specs have been applied to the construction. I don't know how the applicant feels about that actually just at some point in the process that the council, within the auspices of this condition, that there's a second thing submitted to the council's approval, and that is the testing regime post-completion. Mr. Sutherland?
Yes, thank you, Madam. More than happy to do that. Actually, we were just before this hearing, we were sort of playing around with wording the condition, trying to figure out where to put that in, because it was something that we'd identified, and there is reference in the proposed revised condition to verification by a qualified acoustic consultant in liaison with the council's environmental health service. And I think it would be really to probably try and expand that out to make sure that liaising with the environmental health service and the planning authority will include agreeing the scope in terms of the completion and the methodology for that. And that is, I think, as you quite rightly pointed out, it's absolutely in the applicant's interest that they carry out testing that's going to be accepted by the planning authority as representative, because there's no point in the applicant doing something and then for the planning authorities to say, well, we're not discharging the condition because we don't accept your methodology. So the applicant would do it anyway, but there's no difficulty in including more of an express requirement, making it clear in the condition that it's not just, wouldn't just be in the interest of the applicant, but the applicant has an obligation to do it. So happy with that.
Yeah, no, that's a good outcome. The only thing I'm going to raise, and it takes us back to some of the discussions right at the start of our meeting about permitted development rights and future alterations. I'm wondering if the systems that are embedded in the design of the building, how vulnerable they are to the actions of the eventual occupiers in terms of removal, change, and whether or not that's something that needs to be considered about, or whether it could be considered. It's quite, we can't make people turn on the ventilator, for example. They can choose to not have it turned on. But I'm not quite sure what the likelihood is of somebody wanting to change the specification of the glazing. It would seem strange to change it, but I'm wondering whether or not we need to cover that in terms of that there is no subsequent change to any of the important design standards that are embedded in the structure. I don't know what the council and the applicant consider about some kind of phrase. I don't know how, it might be too difficult to find an appropriate terminology. Mr. Sutherland?
My initial view is that it would be a range of planning control for somebody to do that, because it would then put the development breach of the conditions. But in any event, I mean, it's entirely standard for agreements with users to to require them to comply with statutory obligations to just really to protect against that position of a tenant or whoever putting the landlord in breach of planning. So I don't think it's necessary, but I'm interested to hear the planning authorities' view on it.
Mr. Scott or Connolly?
I'm trying to think of a word in form of wording that would, it's difficult to think of a form of wording that would, or that's taken away from the.
Yeah, I think there would need to be some form of wording that would prevent, it wouldn't necessarily be, there could be potentially future internal or external alterations that wouldn't require planning permission.
Yeah.
So we could include a condition to catch or to remove permitted development rights for internal and external alterations to the building.
There is this sort of catch-all phrase, and it's something that's quite common. It's just and if we call them the final design mitigation measures for the purposes of this conversation, that they are maintained for the lifetime of the building. There is that. Using a turn of phrase along those lines, it might give you something that was enforceable if somebody was to do something reckless and open the building up to noise ingress. Applicant, you got your hand up again, Mr. Sutherland.
Just looking at additional word that we propose or that is proposed. Way down in condition 42, talking about the detailed design, and we're proposing that there would be additional wording in this thing, and thereafter the mitigation measures shall be implemented in the approved manner. It could just be that says, and thereafter the mitigation measures shall be implemented and maintained in the approved manner, something along those lines.
I think I'd like to see something that looks at long-term maintenance because of the agent of change principle, that there is something that shows that this is something this building will always have to contain, and it gives us, or gives the council some recourse at a later date if there was some reckless action on the behalf of an occupier. Susan Connolly, you've raised your hand there.
Yes, I'm just wondering from experience, planning conditions very often get lost when there's new occupiers or new owners of buildings or parts of buildings, and whether or not that particular requirement could be burden on the title, as you know, within the Section 75 agreement, so that when a property is sold on to a subsequent party, then they're made aware of the title burdens. It might get lost. Yeah. I'm just thinking about, anyone even subsequently having to submit an application for planning permission, say, for example, for replacement windows on the rear elevation because something's failed. Would a planner in 15 years pick up the previous conditions and understand them when we are long gone? So I just think in terms of mechanisms for ensuring that subsequent owners are aware of, the situation and why it's there.
I don't know if the applicant has intentions on what their deeds of sale should say in the contract documents with their occupiers and owners. It strikes me as something that could easily be included, having seen title deeds on a personal basis. I've seen things like that included. So, Mr. Sutherland?
Modular obligations slightly later. But in relation to this particular point, this is something that can be controlled by condition, and a planning obligation, which is how a deed of conditions need to be put in place. Planning obligations should only be put in place if the matter can be conditioned. This can be conditioned, and I think that the reason given by Ms. Connolly that it would be easier for the council in the future to keep track of things if there was a planning obligation requiring deeded condition is wholly unnecessary and would and it's not that simple to put these things in place, and it would put a real unnecessary burden on the applicant where it can be conditioned, and it is the planning authority's role to keep track of conditions, and I would strongly oppose a requirement to have this deeded conditions simply because it may be helpful for the planning authority.
Ms. Connolly?
Yeah, it was just to say, I mean, I do agree with you, a planning condition should be sufficient, but I'm thinking about what might be more effective in the long term, not the kind of short or immediate term. What was it?
I've kind of come to my end of my questions. I think it might be quite useful just to summarise where I think we got to in the noise questions, and then I will actually ask if anybody else has any views, but I'll tell you what I think we've more or less got to, and I'll double check with the applicant and the council. So I think we understand that the condition needs a bit more structure to it in terms of the initial requirement for the design, the submission of the final design solution with whatever wording is correct there. Alongside that, a list of what must be in that design solution, and that list should be robust enough to include anything that might be necessary to secure the standards that Mr. Mackenzie's report has recommended to us. That the testing is important post-completion, and that the methodology for that testing should be submitted for approval, and the results of that testing should be submitted for that approval. And in that methodology will be things like who should carry it out, what the best type of testing regime should be, whether it's the noise source that is used, the points made by Ms. McIntyre, and that in the middle of all that, there is then, or at the end of all that, there is a phrase that ensures that if there is a result which shows that the standard is not met, that the building is not occupied until some remedial action is taken to sort that out. And then the testing is repeated to show that the improvement has been made. And then if possible, we add in some kind of wording to make sure that the design that's going to be embedded into the final construction of the building, that is retained for the lifetime of the development as best as we can. Some terminology that shows that it must be kept, and to give the planning authority and others an opportunity to come back if we see any of those standards being eroded through remodelling or extensions and alterations to the building at a later date. Do those steps accord with what you've just heard, and is that according to your own understanding of what we've talked? I'll ask the applicant first.
Yes, with just one point where I think there'd been a bit of misunderstanding on this end was in relation to the requirement to specify the detailed mitigation measures and to expand the list of things that should be included, the concern being that just now some things are mentioned and others are not. Our position is actually that rather than expanding it, it should just be deleted altogether. I thought I completely hadn't picked up that point. Because actually, if it's just deleted altogether, then you have an obligation, which is a requirement condition, which is to produce that detailed scheme mitigation measures, has to be approved in writing by the planning authority, and then those mitigation measures have to be implemented. So that would certainly get around the difficulty of some things being mentioned and not others. Another alternatively, it could be that the words could be inserted with shall includes, but not limited to. I think we start to get into what's really the purpose of that wording, and what are the concerns? Just finally, that point is Again, even if we could try and think of everything that might be necessary now, but until actually that detailed design has taken place, then there might still be something that the applicant thinks they want to put in that's not on the list. And so, yeah.
And okay, that's an equally valid thing, because as long as we've got the tie-in back to the overarching recommendations from the noise impact assessment as the sort of purpose of the designed mitigation measures, then that should encompass everything that the report was recommending in terms of the various things like the ventilation and the high spec of double glazing and such like. Ms. McIntyre, you wanted to come in on that point?
Yes, please. It's just really to just make a final point. It's just doubling back again to the standards to be applied. I know there was some discussion earlier on about the condition perhaps being modified to contain reference to a noise rating curve. And obviously I'm aware that the council's position has been that that should be in R25. And as I've said before, that's not my position. Just linking that back into what you just said about the RMP acoustic report, it's worth maybe noting that in that acoustic report, there is assessment against NR25 and NR15, and then it sort of draws some conclusions about why NR25 is, has been adopted on the basis of the number of events and things like that. And I think what I'm just trying to pull in is that I think it's really important that that standard is clear and robust. But if the acoustic report itself has sort of two positions, I feel it almost needs to be clarified through the condition rather than leaning on the report, which obviously has a number of different moving parts again to it and the way that it's been set out. And again, this just links back to agent of change and being absolutely confident that the mitigation is sufficient, which means it's been assessed against a robust enough standard in the first place to make sure that future residents and the music venue can coexist. So forgive me for going back round again, but I just thought it was important to reiterate.
I'm not. Yes, it's a point well made. I'm pretty certain that the condition as it was evolving with the version from the applicant was going to reference NR25, and certainly that's the version that was submitted for consideration. So I think that's something that will come out as the condition is rewritten. I'm just going to come back to the council. Are you happy with that summary and the additional points we made there about the list of mitigation measures not being set out specifically so that it can be as a more general requirement so that it ties back to the recommendations? Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I'd say certainly your laying out the details is acceptable.
Summary of it,
I agree with Mr. Sutherland. Yeah, just in terms of whether it should be specifying each item or whether it should just be a catch-all.
Yeah, that's fine. And I see, you've put your hand up. Sorry, I was leaving you to the end, and apologies for that. But I was trying to get that sorted out in terms of before I moved on. Do you want to raise your point? Your microphone.
Yes, I want to make a point. Yeah, it's because last week we have the site visit. We found out that the air handling units, for the fruit market halls, at the rooftops, which is without the roof, So I just wondering, because I heard of a sort of a sidelight analysis, for the acoustics, because the air handling units, can be seen, from the post residential unit. So I'm not sure whether will that be applicable, in the initial analysis of the architecture plan, because it will affect the form of the roof and also the layout, the story height, if the sidelight analysis.
I'm not quite sure. Obviously, this is the air handling on the top of the venue that we talked about briefly at the site visit. I'm not quite sure what your point is. I wonder if you could have another go at explaining your question there.
Because
A line of sight.
The outdoor air handling units are without the roof, yeah. So it can be seen from the residential units, yeah, in the futures, yeah. And so if in that case, yeah, I just want to know whether the satellite analysis to with regard to the noise source of the air handling unit will affect the result of the guidance in the futures. Yeah.
Okay, right. So the way we left the operation of the air ventilation system was that I asked for some additional information from the applicant and the council regarding what the background to that was and whether or not when the applicant carried out some extra noise testing, whether it was running at that time. So we're in the process of separately acquiring some information on the impact of the air handling unit in the broader noise information, if I use that phrase, in terms of the data we have about the noise from the building. I don't have the answer to that yet. So that's something that's happening. It's part of the bigger process of understanding the noise characteristics at the site. It's not part of the conditions that we're talking about just now, because the conditions are going to deal with the noise that happens, whatever that might be, and that would include any noise coming from the building. And what I'm waiting from the applicant is a bit more clarity as to whether the noise handling units would make a difference to what noise was tested and the results of that. So that is happening just now. I don't think it makes a difference to the condition just now. I don't think that's a crucial part of the condition. I'm going to ask the applicant if they agree with that. I've kind of answered for you, but I think that's where I am with it, is that I'm looking for a bit of clarity about the air handling. Is the applicant able to confirm that's your understanding of it as well?
We will be putting in a response by, I think it's either next Monday or Tuesday.
And Mr. Scott, I think you were asked to give some information on that as well from your perspective.
Yes, certainly the request was there if we wanted to comment.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So we are, for for Kim Hughes' question, we are dealing with it. I just don't think it's got a direct input to the wording of the condition at the moment. So with that, in that regard, what I'm going to ask before we move on to the next topic, does anybody else have any points to raise about the style of the condition and the purpose of the condition? You've always been listening to the conversations we've been having, but has anybody else got a point they wish to make regarding this particular noise condition before we move on? Lindsay McIntyre.
Just to pick up on something that we talked about in the site visit the other day, obviously this condition's been very much focused on the amplified sound aspect, but it was just to pick up on the load in and load out noise in particular that we spoke about when we were standing out in the street and talking about, trucks coming and going in the early hours of the morning and things like that. And I just wondered if there was any mechanism to pick up on that type of noise as well.
My feeling it might be opening up the noise impact assessment. Perhaps the applicant could confirm your understanding of that.
That's supposed to be. My answer to that is definitely not related to today's unit. I think it's the idea that it's starting to the requirement for the development, not just to comply with the agent of change principle, but to ensure that we'll protect against any bad neighbor behavior, any environmental noise in the surrounding area. So I think that's certainly opening up a whole different line of discussion, which is not what we're here to discuss today.
Yeah. Kinfee still has hand up, but I'm assuming that's from before. He's lost his cameras, I think. Yeah, that's fine. The only thing that I want to sort of secondary bit of is in relation to condition 30 and the standard set there for 45 decibels and 35 decibels. And obviously that was coming out of a different, it's a kind of normal, if I could call it, or standard condition that the council uses for noise next to road traffic. And I just wanted to check with the noise experts that and I think it comes through in your amended condition, Mr. Sutherland, is this idea that these noise standards would be picked up by whatever noise insulation measures are going into the building. But I just wanted to check that there isn't some other standard that we aren't picking up by putting in condition 30. Has the council given you another or additional requirement in terms of the noise insulation for the building by putting that condition on? What Mr. Mackenzie might know is whether or not that the all the information, the noise impact assessment is going to pick up those two noise standards, the 35 and 45 decibel set out in condition 30.
Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie. Answer this point.
The assessment of traffic noise, primarily in Ingram Street, is set out in section 7 of our assessment table 23. It's the required glazing and ventilation to achieve the target level, and the target level is the 45 and 35 set by the council, which is their standard road traffic noise performance, the target level within the property. The section 8, which is the summary recommendation, again repeats the sound insulation that should be provided for the facade to achieve the council's 45-35 standard.
So the simple question is that everything's set out, and if we're taking forward the recommendations in section 8, we'll pick up everything that's needed to deal with the traffic noise standard specified in condition 30, as well as the NR25 standard that's informing the noise venue. I just wanted to check that was the case. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Mr. Scott, is that your understanding as well, that these two conditions are not going to cause the condition 30 doesn't cause a difficulty for the implementation of condition 42?
Yes, that's our understanding as well.
Right, okay. Well, I think I've covered everything I need to with regard to that noise condition, and I'm conscious now it's 4 o'clock. I was really wanting to keep going as far as possible without taking a break, just to make sure we can get through all our business today by 5 if possible. Is everybody happy just to keep going, or does anybody need a short break just now? Everybody seems happy enough to keep going, so let's crack on. The next item is item 4, which is about the condition 27. I think we can deal with this quite quickly. I've had a look at some guidance on what a condition can and can't do, and one of the examples given in the circular about the test of an effective condition is about not attempting to create a public right through the terms of a planning condition. Are the council and the applicant happy that the condition 27 is revised so that the use of the word public is removed, and we just deal with it being open or unlocked, and that you deal with the issue of public access through the terms of the legal agreement?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Scott said yes.
Yes.
Does anybody else have a view on the issue? I think, oh, there's David Cowan. You want to come in on that point? No. Got his hand up, nothing's happening. Mr. Cowan, are you making a point on this? What's happening there? We'll keep going for now. See if we're coming back. So the next item is condition 5, item 5 relating to condition 17 and in part condition 16. I think the bullet points in my agenda are fairly straightforward. I was really just looking for a reason, and possibly the council can answer this fairly quickly, why condition 17 needs the submission of a further landscape scheme when you already have one, and that whether or not condition 16, which was looking at different structures in the roof so that you could take larger plants, whether or not that's all about moving the landscape scheme on. Are you able to give me greater clarity on that, Mr. Scott?
Yeah, I think, I agree that we have been provided with landscaping details as part of the application submission. So I would agree that condition 17 could probably be reworded to refer to a finalised scheme, landscaping scheme, referring, as you say, back to condition 16, which does look for further details in terms of planting. And then also at the end of condition 16, just to ensure that the development is implemented in the agreed manner in terms of a finalised scheme of landscaping. So rather than just reiterating something that we've already received, refer it more to a further finalised scheme.
And there was a reference in condition 17 to retained features, but I think that might be, my impression is it's a throwback to a standard condition, and because I didn't see anything retained.
Yeah, that's correct.
So remove retained features. And I asked a question just about the number or the size of the replacement trees that are going into the open space or possibly the rooftop gardens, whether or not you needed to be more prescriptive, and I just wondered if you had a view on that.
We've never considered prescribing a specific number of trees. It's really down to the finalised landscaping scheme and just what can be accommodated. So we've never been prescriptive, and just in terms of the number of trees.
Even in a conservation area situation where you're dealing with the loss of the trees and there's a precise number, you wouldn't consider putting a minimum number on the trees? No?
Certainly not something we've sought either in this application or previously.
And I'll take the final points about the public art. Again, there's a sensitivity obviously through the representations regarding the protection of the mural on the side of the building, and I know it's technically not the applicant's mural, so it's not that it's there in a position to control its long-term future, but whether or not there needs to be some kind of mechanism just to give it some kind of protection during the construction. And would you be agreeable to that?
Yeah, I think I agree to some form of wording in that condition that could seek the protection of the mural during the construction works.
Does the applicant want to come back on any of these points? They were mostly focused on Mr. Scott. I'll come back to the others in a minute. I just want to catch the applicant's views.
Just on that last point, and that's the protection of the mural during construction is something that we picked up in the construction management plan.
Okay. Does that have its own condition? I think it did. Right.
Oh, really?
Oh, and put it in under the temporary barricades.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Susan Connolly, you want to come back on anything from the planning authority's point of view?
Yeah, I think Alan may have provided some clarification on the mural situation to you in our amended conditions, which will be further amended. And I just wanted to draw attention to that.
Yeah, it does. I haven't circulated that, so
Yeah.
I was because it come in too late. But if you wanted to make the point now, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean the mural initiative, if you like to call it that, is simply a way of enlivening blank gables next to sites that might be developed or are currently vacant and derelict. So they're not intended to be a long-term strategy, or they're not intended to prohibit development of an adjacent site. So there's a bit of an evolution.
Temporary protection doesn't undermine that if it's to survive until another scheme or an alternative project comes along. That makes sense. Dr. Mills, you wanted to come in on these conditions regarding landscaping and public art.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting that there's no number of trees has arisen this time, because I don't know why then in the biodiversity matrix it was stipulated that there would be 8 trees to replace the 21 that were to be felled. However, aside from that, also in the biodiversity matrix, I think at each floor level, there's a comment that LEMPs are required to fully assess target condition. So is that what we're talking about here? Landscape and ecological management plans, which are still to come. And also looking at the NRS biodiversity comment, there are 3 comments. It's a very short document. It's only a 1-page document. And there are 3 items highlighted that there is not clarity on. And I'm just wondering if these are all still to be addressed as well. Thank you.
I don't know if Alan Scott's able to come back on that. Is there something still still to be addressed from your consultation reply?
I don't believe so. I tried to find Mr. Garner's comments, but no, as far as I can recall, Mr. Garner's comments were satisfied with the submission, the documents that were submitted, the preliminary ecological appraisal report, which was submitted with the application. So no, I don't have anything further to add to that.
No, sorry. I'm not recognising that name. It was actually signed off by Carol McLean, and it was landscape design show a yellow key for climbing plants, but don't show any climbing plants areas. Can this be clarified? There is mention of a comprehensive landscape and biodiversity strategy, but I couldn't locate that document. There's no detail on the proposed management of the wildflower meadow area. It'd be useful to see the detail on this.
Possibly at that stage they hadn't been able to review the full appraisal, and subsequently, once they were able to view the full appraisal, then they were satisfied with everything that was laid out within that. I don't think there's anything further they were seeking.
I'm seeing condition 18 appears to deal with implementation and phasing, and then 19 deals with the maintenance arrangements for the landscape. So that perhaps picks up some of the points there about how the open space is managed in the longer term, or the planted areas are managed in the longer term. Would that be correct, Mr. Scott?
Yeah, that's correct. And then there's condition 43 refers to the ecological appraisal, and recommendations and measures within that to be implemented.
Okay. No, that's fine. Does the applicant want to come back on those points? All right, so we'll just deal with those points first, Dr. Mills. Or do you want to, sorry, make your other point, Dr. Mills? Your mic's not on. We've just missed all of that.
Sorry, there we go. It's just when you're referring to condition 43, it's also noteworthy that the biodiversity matrix expired on the 8th of August last year, and the provisional ecological assessment and bat survey will expire about the end of October, beginning of November this year. And the recommendations for those were to be repeated, certainly for the biodiversity matrix, and then for badger and bat surveys for the bat survey report.
That's a fair point. If through the passage of time, some of these surveys are out of date, would there be a basis to ask for the ecological surveys to be updated prior to commencement of work? Does the council, the applicant feel
Yeah, I think
that?
that's entirely reasonable.
Is the applicant with you?
These are matters that have to be visited and lived. When there are statutory obligations in relation to these matters, then they will file just as planning permission has been granted.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks for raising that, Dr. Mills. Yeah, that's a good point. Again, it's the difficulty of an application like this that grows arms and legs when it gets referred into the ministers. So I think I've got answers on the landscaping scheme and public art. I think that's all working out reasonably well. But so I've got a wee bit more clarity on what changes are needed. Item 6. These can be dealt with as a block, and having seen Mr. Scott's submission, I know that you were looking at just tidying these up and correcting some missing wording that ensured the proposals would be implemented as approved, and addressing some missing text where necessary. Is it possible for you just to agree that you're happy to make those changes to the draft conditions? Is that under item 6?
Yeah, I'm entirely happy to do that.
And that takes us now on to item 7. And this might need a little bit more of a discussion. My notes here. So, the Council's Committee report makes provision for payment, amongst other things in the legal agreement, but a payment linked to the non-provision of some of the open space obligations that's set out in a council policy document. I'm really looking to make sure those payments meet the required tests set out in Circular 3/2012. And just really wanted to kind of talk this through with the applicant. I know that the applicant may have agreed to it, but I couldn't find anywhere in the heads of terms an obligation that the payment would be used directly in the vicinity of the application site or within a reasonable distance or whatever, that wherever that open space money was spent, that it would actually be somewhere that would benefit the residents of the development. And that was making me a little bit nervous about whether or not the payment would meet the requirements of the guidance. And I'm going to quote you from section 18. I'm sure, I don't know if everybody will have a copy of that guidance. I was hoping you'd have a look at it because I referred to it in the agenda. But paragraph 18 says, Planning obligations should not be used to extract advantages, benefits, or payments from landowners or developers which are not directly related to the proposed development. The obligation should demonstrate that this test is met by specifying clearly the purpose for which any contribution is required, including the infrastructure to be provided. And at the moment, the financial payment is an open-ended sum. There's nothing that comes with it in the paperwork I've seen that connects that payment to an actual piece of infrastructure or investment in facilities. And I was wondering if you were able, with a bit of forewarning, Mr. Scott, whether ever you've been able to give me more clarification on that item.
Simply that's, it refers to our policy within the city development plan, IPG or CDP 12, IPG 12, and at this stage we don't know for certain which particular sites or play space that the money would be allocated to. And I don't know if you've got anything further to add to the actual allocation of IPG 12 monies.
Yes, the allocation of IPG 12 monies in this case, I think we've got a few categories, which are outdoor sport and was it children's play? So that money is put into different funds. The outdoor sport, the formal outdoor sport money is then administered by the council and its formal sports pitches strategy. So that applies to all developments that qualify under IPG 12. The other contributions in lieu of on-site provision are then placed in a fund which is allocated on the basis, not by ourselves, not administered by ourselves. There's a committee which administer those contributions, and that is administered on the basis of adjacency to the site. So there's a process that's undertaken to identify potential opportunities within the vicinity of the site in the first instance. And if there is no opportunities found, it was through a process where it looks at a wider area where facilities could be provided. It was a separate process within the corporate administration, but out with specific intervention, if you like, by the planning service itself. So Alan and I could not decide where that money is spent. That has to go through an audited process.
Yeah, okay. Does the applicant have a view on this point?
I'm just looking at IPG 12 and effectively Ms. Connolly's been summarising what is said there about the process the council will go through in terms of looking to allocate funds as directly as in a way that's most directly connected to the development as possible, and then you go out from there in stages. So I suppose there's a policy basis for that in IPG 12. So I suppose that the section 75 planning obligation could include a clause where if the council gets to the end of that process and the money's still sitting there, then after 10 years there's an obligation to repay the money to the applicants or something along those lines. And I think that would protect against or it would make it comply with section 18 of the guidance in terms of that if it's not going to be used for something that in policy terms the council considers is connected with the development, then it has to be repaid. And that's quite, I suppose that wording is quite normal for things like contributions to primary schools and such like. So I hope that the council wouldn't have any difficulty with that.
No, we wouldn't. We already include that clause.
I'm wondering whether it might be quite beneficial to get from the council a little bit more information along those lines, so that if I'm reporting to the ministers, I can tell them that the money, when it is, if it is paid through the auspices of that legal agreement, that it would be, I suppose, ring fence is perhaps too strong a word, but certainly would be focused on a qualifying project and returned if such a project didn't come forward in a reasonable time period. If that was added to your heads of terms, that would make it easier for me to report how that payment is working in terms of the guidance. Is that possible?
Yes, I agree to that.
I saw some hands up on this point. Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, Elspeth, just to say that as the developers will be aware, there's no provision locally for space for the development of play areas. So we are talking, as Susan Conley has intimated, we are talking about investing that money in somewhere further away from the development, which in my opinion is totally against the spirit of NPF4. As far as NPF4 is concerned, if the council are serious at attracting families to this development, then it's supposed to be local play areas that are being provided.
Thank you. Does the council want to come back on that point?
I don't mind. Yeah, I don't mind commenting. Yeah, I mean, we don't disagree with that sentiment. However, in the city centre, you know, as you'll be aware, the council does not have land ownership to allocate the money immediately adjacent to this site. So we have to go through the process of trying to identify a suitable location for the investment.
Does the applicant have a view on that point?
Just to see that NPF4 policies in relation to this are not incompatible with Glasgow City Council's local development planning policies, and NPF4 is national policy, but it is policy only. So as Ms. Connolly is pointing out there, that actually the requirement of what can be achieved on site has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So that's a matter of judgment for the authority and for the Scottish ministers.
Dr. Mills.
Thank you. I just want to reinforce what Mr. Hughes has said, that there is no other site available where suitable play or sport could be had near the area. There are countless other buildings going up, flats going up here, there, never here, there, and everywhere around us. And if the idea is to attract families to the area with no play facilities whatsoever, that's not good. Thank you.
Mr. Hughes, were you want to come back on that? Your hand was up, but you've gone again. Is that okay? Yeah. Does the applicant want to come back on that point again, or are you happy we've covered everything there? Thank you. Okay, so I can see from that there's a sort of general agreement that with the right terminology behind it, the heads of terms for that payment has the potential to comply with policy. That's the council and the applicant's position on it. So I think the action point from that will be that we look for a little bit more clarity that I can pass on to the Scottish ministers regarding that particular item. That takes me on to condition topic 8, and that was just whether there were any other conditions that I have missed that someone feels have not fully covered the matters that were expected. Peter Hayman.
Thank you. It's something that we haven't covered in this meeting, and I don't have the references to quote, but it has recently come to my notice that the flooding provision, the anti-flooding provision, might be in question in this instance, because the Spitfire Cafe on the corner of Candleriggs and Ingram Street has a regular flooding of its basement each time there is a downpour, and that is coupled with the regular flooding of the basement car park in the Todd building where I reside, and these are, I think, I don't have the details, but I think they're coupled with the inadequacy of the local drainage system, and by taking away the capacity of the current site with its trees and open space to absorb water, this might exacerbate the situation considerably if it was built on.
Well, my question was really about conditions. I'm going to push you a little bit on how that's connected to the draft.
I think there is a condition about the requirement for the anti-flooding capability of the site, and I just don't have it to hand. I'm sorry.
So there is a condition at 8 that deals with sustainable urban drainage.
Yes.
Yeah, and then, but not one that's dealing with an actual flood scheme. Perhaps Alan Scott, you can remember what the outcome was on that. My recollection was that the surface water system was going to be sufficient. Whatever was going to be put in place was going to deal with that. But you can maybe assure me of what your recollection is.
That's correct. Certainly our flood risk team did review the proposal, hence why we have condition 8 in terms of the details of the final drainage design, and they've also asked for condition 9, which is the confirmation of technical approval from Scottish Water. So they considered those conditions sufficient from their point of view.
Does the applicant have a view on that? Is that your recollection of the circumstances?
Yes, that's correct, ma'am, and just point out that the applicant did submit a full flooding drainage surface water strategy that has been assessed as part of the application.
Thank you. Dr. Mills, do you have a point to raise on another one of the other conditions?
Another 2, perhaps, if that's possible.
Back on.
The first one was 44. Regarding the possibility of human remains. There just seems to be a conflict between what the Scottish Government advises, what the West of Scotland Archaeology Service say, and how the Council interpret the Government's policy. So the Government's policy says an archaeological field evaluation to be carried out before the planning application is determined. The West of Scotland Service said because of an attached condition in 2007 application that the work could be carried out after consent had been issued, but before the start of the main phase of construction. And the Council's interpretation was government policy recommends that planning authorities should ensure that procedures are in place in order that appropriate recording is undertaken before and/or during development. So there seems to be quite a conflict of interpretation there.
Well, that's it's more about the condition. Are you saying that the condition is not correct?
Well,
I mean, I know you're quoting the source of different views on how archaeology should be treated, but in what respect is condition 44 remiss in that regard.
In as much as it's not going to happen anytime soon, and when is it going to happen? You know, is the written scheme, when is it going to be put in place, and when is it going to be undertaken?
Well, my reading of it is that's actually what's going to come in as part of the condition. Mr. Scott, is that your understanding of that condition?
Yeah, that's correct. No development shall take place within the development site as outlined in red until the developer has secured the implementation of a programme for archaeological works. Yeah, that's stipulates when it's going to take place.
Well, that's the question in a way. When is it going to take place?
Well, maybe the applicant can confirm, but obviously, from the purposes of the condition, it would just be before development starts, or before the actual built development starts.
Right.
Does the applicant have anything else to add?
No, nothing further. That will happen at commencement of development.
What do we mean by commencement of development? Do we mean before the trees are felled, or after the trees are felled, or?
Mr. Scott, do you have a view on what you consider to be commencement of development?
Commencement development in this case, well, it's not demolition, it's commencement development on site. So site, no development shall take place within development as outlined in red. So whether that's, we could possibly tighten the wording. It's a standard condition, so we could, if you would wish, we could look at tightening the specifics of that condition.
Well, my understanding is that development does have a meaning, and commencement of development has a legal meaning. Mr. Sutherland's nodding. Perhaps that's the point you were going to make. Have you something to add?
No, that's apart from just using that it's obviously it's legal. It's legally understood to mean something. Maybe just for Dr. Mills, for her benefit, and that would mean any kind of development. So before the developer did anything on site which constituted development in terms of as a matter of law, then this would have to have been done.
Well, in my ignorance, I don't know what commencement of development means precisely. So that's why I'm asking the question. I'm not a lawyer.
Well, the question then is, I have a reasonably good grasp of what the development might mean in terms of it's generally works of construction, if we could put it that way for the purposes of our discussion. And Mr. Scott, would you see that there's merit in doing that work before the trees were felled? Would that make a difference in terms of how effective the archaeological condition was if it was done before or after the trees were felled?
I think I would prefer to consult with colleagues from West Scotland Archaeology Service and take their guidance on when they feel would be more appropriate if they want to be a bit more specific. So obviously that's a standard condition, so potentially they might want to take the site specifics into account. So I'd rather take consultation from them.
Does the applicant want to come back on that point?
Various in terms of the meaning of development, which meaning of development is material operation, and again, the applicant would be happy with just to stick with that rather than trying to define something more specific, because until actually the applicant or whoever's implementing the planning permission gets to the point of programming the works, then it won't be absolutely clear actually what operation is going to come forward first that will constitute commensurate development. But I think the point I was trying to get across before was that it would mean no material operation. So that would mean, which would include going on and uprooting trees. So I think and lots of other things as well, which could equally disadvantage or cut across the purpose of the survey. So my preference of half the applicant really would just be to leave that wording alone. But I think it'd be. I also agree with Mr. Scott that if there is going to be any change, then it needs to be discussed with West of Scotland Archaeology Service.
I'm not getting from this Dr. Mills, unfortunately, about what difference it would make as to whether or not the archaeology investigation was done before or after the trees. I'm not entirely sure what you were trying to get at. I think nobody can give you an actual date for the work for two reasons. One, this scheme doesn't have planning permission at the moment, and two, if it does get planning permission, we don't know when that date is. And then the applicant has a set time after that in which they can decide to commence the work. It's 3 years. So offering a precise timescale for you just now in the course of this hearing will always be difficult. So I think you have to be reassured that it's a task that must be carried out before the archaeology could be lost, in theory. I think would be the best way of describing it.
May I just respond briefly?
Yes.
It's just that the actual Scottish Government wording is that evaluation to be carried out before the planning application is determined. And at the moment, it hasn't been determined, if I'm right in thinking. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So that's the Scottish guidance, aside from West of Scotland Archaeology Service report. The reason for there was a condition in 2007 doesn't necessarily mean that we should adhere to that condition in 2023.
Right. So your issue is actually not with the condition, but with the council's position not to ask for an archaeological survey at this stage, right?
And I have another one, if that's all right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
To do it shorter, I think it's to do with conditions 23 and 32 about the vents and the flues and cooking smells. It's my understanding that there will be two vents, not just one, a metre high on the roof terrace. So I'm not sure how that works with cooking smells for the people who are using the roof terraces, and also that the ducts are to be free from any obstruction, which kind of leaves them open to being blocked.
Look, applicant's got its hand up. Do you know much about the ducting for the potential cooking areas?
It's legacy hand, ma'am, but I'm
All right.
but I understand from Mr. Westwater that actually the flues go up through the green roof, which is actually up above the terraced area.
Mr. Scott, do you recall the background, or sorry, Miss Connolly want to come in on that point? Do you know the background to the flue issue and the need for the condition?
Yeah, it's generally a standard condition to ensure that the emission of potential fumes from cooking is above the datum or above the windows of the building, and it can disperse appropriately. But part of the condition does request details for approval. And also includes a kind of maintenance strategy for it.
Yeah.
So a lot of the ventilation systems for premises, food premises that cook, have actually been updated. So there are some units and technologies that don't require high level flues, but we would assess that at the point of the detailed design of the building.
Obviously, because it's a standard condition, you'll see obviously in the agreements of changes that I asked Mr. Scott to agree to. One of them was just making it clear that condition 32 was relating to the commercial premises that happen to have food preparation, because obviously there are other kitchens that would be residential. So it was just a point of clarification. So this is clearly aimed at a commercial kitchen operation.
Yep.
I'm reading it. It does use singular in point A. The duct shall be free and shall be disposed of by means of a duct. But I'm reading that in a general terms that it wouldn't preclude there being more than one duct. It just means the fumes should be in a duct. Would that be the right interpretation of that condition?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. And I think condition 23, I wonder if you could confirm, I'm reading condition 23 as vents and flues that really that might be the residential vents and flues. Would that be the right understanding of that? You just nod if you think
yes.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Yes.
So I think I take your point about the possibility of them being blocked, but I think that has to be something that the planning authority just deal with in terms of the design. I think that's a standard approach where obviously your colleagues that deal with food hygiene and environmental health would consider and make a judgment as to whether the system was appropriate. I don't think there's any failing in the condition that I could see that primarily from the point that Ms. Conley is making that actually you're going to get a scheme before you actually agree it. It's just that these are the parameters of the scheme. Would that be correct? Yeah.
Yes.
You nodded. Yeah. I hope that's all right. I think I don't think that's as risky as a condition as you're imagining, Dr. Mills. I think it's actually it's going to catch the systems quite adequately, and then only then if there are commercial kitchens that come forward in the ground floor uses in the future. And I've got one last query from Kinfee. You've got your hand up.
Yes, we talk about the subjects of acoustics, but I also want to know that the building separation in terms of the fire spread, will that also be applicable to the conditions here? Because the roofs of the fruit market, for the bars area, they have the roof light and also roof structures. The main structures of the fruit market is timber, and roof couplings is metal claddings. So I just questions the five vulnerabilities of the roof. We affect the building separations of the future residential buildings in the adjoining site.
Okay, I think I would sort of apologize because it's not great online, but I think you were saying fire spread. Is that right? The fire spread between the site
building separations.
Yeah. My instinct is that isn't a planning matter, but I'll ask Mr. Scott and the applicant just to confirm their understanding of the matters of fire transference.
I'd say that's more a matter for our building standards colleagues to consider rather than the planning application.
Does the applicant agree? You can.
Yes, I agree.
Again, I'll maybe just clarify, obviously, for can we, is that basically when you're there are two distinct permissions required here. One is the planning permission that this process is dealing with, and a completely separate process, which is the building warrant, and that tests the building against the current Scottish building regulations, and in that is issues of fire and fire protection, and it's just not something that the planning application deals with, because there's this other consenting regime that picks it up and deals with it in much more detail than we ever could. And the applicants' designs are not at that stage yet. Generally, they wouldn't progress to design that level of detail until after they have their planning permission. So we're at one, we're really dealing with one confined permission, and the other one will deal with the fire. Is that okay? Is that helpful?
Okay, yeah.
Thanks. I'm now coming to the end. I think I've got further actions required. I'm going to try and remember everything we've talked about. So we're picking up from the various items on the agenda. We're looking at, and I'm wondering, as a primary point, out with this meeting, whether or not I could ask the applicant and the council to really work on condition 42 together and find wording that they are both content with, so that it comes back to me with the terminology and the process and all the things we've talked about today, to write it out with these various stages of submission and approval. I think I'd like to see that, and I'd like to see the applicant and the council kind of work on that together, rather than have us going back and forward with the council's version and then the applicant's version. And you could be doing that out with all the parties, but I wouldn't exclude the other parties from making comments on that. I'm not trying to exclude you from that discussion, but it might save time if the applicant and the council were able to agree that wording, and then that is the version that perhaps we share with the participants to ask for further comments. I'm also, I think it would be really useful, because we've touched on so many conditions today, especially these minor ones or the minor changes, I should say, in section 6. I think it would be useful to get an entire set of conditions from the council again. And I know Mr. Scott was already working on that, so I don't think it's a huge step to take that forward. And keep me right, but I think then and I'm just going to run through here, we're looking at changes to condition 24 that clarify and hone in on really how much of control over the further future changes of use that you need to have within that condition. We're looking at condition 42. I've just discussed that. We've gone through that at length, and about putting in the proper stages to it of approval and agreement. We're addressing condition 27 by rewording that so that the concept of public access is not something that the condition is trying to deliver, and relying then on the section 75 to deliver the concept of public access. Conditions 17 and 16, you were going to remove the retained features and really clarify that it's the final scheme taking on board all the other updates that is going to come forward. And you're going to build into either condition 12 or condition 1 some provision to just put some protective measures in place to give the existing mural a chance of surviving the construction process. Condition 6 has all the kind of minor alterations, and then we were picking up, don't think there was anything, oh yes, the one thing that Dr. Mills raised, and that's about the possibility of building into the conditions that deal with ecological surveys the provision for resurveying in advance of commencement of work, so that they're up to date at the point where the builders are going on site, as such, if I could use that phrase, so that the ecological information is as up to date as possible, and the applicant was reasonably content that that would be done in any event. I think that's what I have are the changes. That you can correct me if I have forgotten anything. I don't think we need to change condition 44. I think that's everything. If you can, does everybody agree that I've covered everything? Dr. Mills, you're raising your hand. Have I missed something out?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. I'm just thinking about the children's play and sport as you're speaking, but I was actually had my hand up for another reason.
Well, I was dealing with the conditions there that were going to be changed. It was in terms of the contribution, that was a separate task, which was to provide some clarification and wording.
Yeah. No, but just very quickly, because I thought we'd spend more time on 6, kind of passed me by, but it was the amendment to number 10, that the predominant materials to be used on all elevations shall be natural stone, paying particular attention to the relationship with the adjoining listed building. So has that been approved to be going ahead?
I'm trying to see where that you're quoting from.
It's the Planning Applications Committee minutes of the 7th of February 2023.
I've not been presented with a condition that uses that wording, Mr. Scott. Does that mean anything to you?
Sorry to interrupt. The minutes, the committee meeting minutes contain that, the wording of that condition. So that condition was then added into the legal instruction with the conditions.
Right, okay.
So yes, Dr. Mills.
We need a new condition 10. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Mills. Apologies, I hadn't picked that up from the minute. Right, so we'll add condition 10 in as well. The reference to use of natural stone.
That's correct.
It's 1B on that document, the GCC hearing minute.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just hadn't picked it up as being an adjustment to the conditions that were in the committee report. Right, was that the only point you were going to make there, Dr. Mills?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. And I wasn't sure if Mr. Sutherland, did you have your hand up about my summary of action points, or were you going to remind me about the legal agreement one? That's fine. I hadn't turned over yet. Page I hadn't turned over, but yeah, that's fine. So some clarification on how the money would be ring fenced and then returned, and I think that would be helpful in advising ministers. So I think I've covered the action points. I know this could take a few days or a couple of weeks. I'm going to be honest here, I'm about to go on a couple of weeks leave, so I'm happy that you take the fortnight and update the conditions, take 14 days from today to work with the applicant over condition 42 and then the other more straightforward corrections that need to be done. And if you're able to present the conditions in 2 weeks' time, I'll arrange for those conditions and invite comments on those conditions from the other parties, just in case there's anything that comes from that they think is not what we discussed today. It's extending the timescales again to do that, but I think that's the right way to go, because obviously it was one of the reasons I didn't want to kind of at the last minute throw in your amended conditions, Mr. Scott, because I really wanted to make sure people had a chance to have a look at them. Did those timescales acceptable to everybody in terms of 2 weeks today for the revised conditions and then a period thereafter to let people comment on them? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's
everybody's nodding. Everybody's. So it's just me that's going on holiday, so that's fine. I've accommodated your holidays earlier in the year. You can accommodate mine. So I think that's bringing the hearing to a close. So well done. We're 2 minutes before 5. I'd really hoped to get it all done this afternoon. So thank you. It was helpful not taking the break and just cracking on and getting things done. So I'll say farewell and thank you for your time and interest today. It's been very helpful to have your contribution. You have spotted some little corners that I'd missed, so this process has been very, very helpful. So thank you very much, and I'll hear from you in due course. I might actually take the precaution of getting Christine to send out a short note of what I think are the action points. That's always helpful, I think, to have that on record as what I think happened today. It puts a record on the case file as to what was to happen next. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.